Hello again, everyone. I'm Eric Sperling. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of All in Education's Parra Sepas. I'd like to welcome today's expert panel. So excited to have with us Stephanie Parra. She is the Executive Director of All in Education. Xavier Gutierrez, he is the President of the Arizona Coyotes. And Stephanie Vasquez, owner of Fair Trade Coffee. Thank you all for being here. Hey, before we get into the panel, I do want to tell you a little bit about All in Education. All in Ed is a local nonprofit organization that exists to build in Arizona where all communities have access to opportunity and justice. Now, their work is focused on strengthening the Latino community by closing the representation gap to build power, influence, and authority across Arizona boardrooms and classrooms. Through this monthly Parra Sepas series, All in Education is working to bridge their advocacy efforts across multiple factors outside of the classroom that are impacting the educational outcomes of students. They're calling these factors the social determinants of education. Parra Sepas will focus on having real, thought-provoking conversations like the one we're going to have today with leaders and community members and identify solutions to work towards creating meaningful changes in the systems meant to serve our communities. Now, today's conversation specifically will center on the topic of Arizona's economic future and workforce. There have been discussions about this topic for a few decades now, specifically surrounding what it means for Arizona to have the majority of its student population Latinos that will become the majority of the workforce, potentially unprepared and underskilled for the available jobs. So before we jump into the action panel, we want to hear a firsthand account of what we're talking about. So let's take a listen to Judith's story.
My first memories of education was during my elementary school years. So I went to school at Pitico Elementary, and I think the right word to use is I was lucky enough to have teachers that really looked like me, that represented my community, that represented my culture, and that really valued the importance of teaching a child, the whole child, right? And the community and building a community around that child. And I say that because my teachers really had a relationship with my parents as well. Like it was a team that raised us in a sense, and I was lucky enough to have that. Unfortunately, when you don't work in the K through 12 field, it's hard to really see how it affects everyday life and how it affects the community, not just the children that are being impacted. So I think that I really didn't notice it until I was really in the field as much. Just the complexities of it. I think the Adelante Fellowship was a really impactful 11 months for me to just and really learn so much about the education system within those 11 months. One of the biggest things that we got from it was being a part of different groups that focused on tackling some of the inequalities within the education system and some of the issues. So the group that I was a part of focused on quality seats. And one of the things that we were doing while we were gathering research on how to really understand what that meant and how to increase quality education for children, teacher shortages became one of the leading topics. The communities that are highest affected by teacher shortage are low-income communities. And unfortunately, that's a correlation to these students not receiving the quality education that they need. We all know that that's a problem. We hear it every day. We hear it on the news, we hear it in our schools, we hear it on the newspaper, we hear it on the radio. There's a problem. We know this. What I think we get wrong is thinking that there's a quick fix to it, or that we can put a Band-Aid on it and it'll solve itself. The teacher shortage wasn't a problem that was created or an outcome of the pandemic. This was years in the making, and it's time for us to start really respecting the profession. I think that's the first step, really respecting the profession and understanding that these teachers need to feel valued, and how one feels valued is when they're respected, when they're paid the wages that they deserve, and that are equitable to everybody else, right? So I think that's definitely where we need to start getting it right. I think my best advice would be one, to start asking questions, to start talking to teachers. I don't think I fully grasped how teachers were feeling and their feelings about the whole situation until we started doing these interviews and these surveys. I think it's important to start asking those questions and really understand the complexities of this issue. And then start speaking up. Go to your schools, go to your school boards. We need voices that will stand up for teachers and students, because in the long run, this teacher shortage really is shorting our students. They're the ones that are getting the short end of the stick.
And a special thank you there to Judith for sharing that story. And we're looking at a graphic here on the screen. This will help us paint a bigger picture. Stephanie, we talk about these numbers a lot. The current student demographic of Phoenix Union High School District, over 92% students of color, 82% of those identify as Latino, and 77% qualify for free or reduced price lunch. Now, historically, the demographics of Phoenix Union High School District have trended 10 years ahead of the city of Phoenix, 20 years ahead of the state of Arizona, and 30 years ahead of the country. All right, so coming back out here on stage, I do actually want to start this conversation a little bit differently, and I'd like to give each of the panelists an opportunity to talk a little bit about your background, talk about yourselves. And Stephanie, we've heard a little bit about your story, but very curious to hear how it pertains to the topic we're discussing today on the show. Stephanie?
Yeah. So I have become incredibly passionate about making sure that kids in Arizona, especially Latino kids like me, have access to opportunity because of my story and who I am and where I'm from. So I grew up a lot like the kids in Phoenix Union. I am first generation American. I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants. My parents are from Sonora, Mexico. I grew up in Yuma, Arizona, though, on the southern border. Our family migrated here through the farm labor movement. That's how my grandfather started coming in the 1940s. Because of the Bracero program, which is the guest worker program back then. And so grew up around that, and as being young, like being a kid, I can remember being as young as about like 5 years old when my dad started kind of exposing us to what life was like for him. He left high school and went to go work the fields, and his experience was one of very hard labor. Right? Being a farm worker is difficult physical labor. And so his scared straight tactic for us was to take us out to show us what that work was like. He showed us what extreme poverty looked like in Mexico. And his answer to us was always, you know, if you don't want to live this life, you have to make sure that you go to school, that you do well in school, that you go to college and get a degree. And it was a message that I heard from both of my parents very early on, and I took it very seriously. I graduated high school at the top of my class. I was able to get a full ride scholarship for migrant students to come to ASU. And so my story is so much like the kids that I represent in the school district and kids growing up here in Phoenix. And I think that's why I have become such a passionate advocate for our community, because I know that there are parents just like mine who are pushing their kids to do more, to be more, to dream bigger, and to achieve the American dream that we're all promised.
Stephanie, appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing. Javier, okay. You're in the Phoenix area, you're in Arizona, you've seen the headlines. You were the first Latino president of not just the Arizona Coyotes, but in the NHL. A lot of incredible stories have been written about your work, but also be curious to hear a little bit about your background and have you share, kind of what Stephanie did, what your upbringing was like and how that helped influence you.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. This is an incredible conversation, and it's very personal to me because, as you mentioned, I have been very fortunate to live the American dream. I'm actually an immigrant to this country. I was born in Guadalajara, Mexico. I came to the United States when I was 5. I was a dreamer before that word even existed. We were undocumented. My mother left Mexico because she really believed that the United States was a place where her children, the oldest of 4, could have an education. And really, education as this agent of change in our family is very much a theme throughout my entire life. And thus, this conversation being so personal to me. She never went to high school. She graduated from the 6th grade. She wanted to be a nurse and then got married and I was born, and then we left when she was pregnant with my sister. We first came to Los Angeles. I started kindergarten there, and then I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in San Jose. She got remarried. I'm the oldest of 4, and my father was a mechanic. He worked at then the GM plant, which is now the Tesla plant in Fremont, California. But education was always at top of mind. And when you have this experience of being an immigrant, you have that immigrant ethos of wanting to do more and wanting to really honor the sacrifice that my parents made in order to come here. And so it was through education that we did that. Was very fortunate. I grew up in the Bay Area when, at the time, public schools were phenomenal in the Bay Area. Sadly, that isn't the case today, and we can talk about that also being the case here in this community, where we need to do more in the public school system. Because from there, I had these incredible teachers that really informed my parents and welcomed my parents into my academic journey. And so much so that my mom actually became the head of the migrant education program at the school district that I grew up in East San Jose, which Eric knows quite well, having grown up there. My teachers encouraged my parents to have me go to the oldest high school in California. It's an all-boys Jesuit high school, where the Jesuits not only embraced me, but my parents. And so that's a theme that you have seen, certainly in my life, but it resonates in other families, where it's the whole family coming together to really support the education journey of the student. From Bellarmine to Bellarmine College Preparatory, I went to Harvard. I had the great fortune of attending Harvard. And from there, I started a career in finance and banking and investment. I did return back to the Bay Area to attend Stanford for law school. I was originally at the business school and the law school, but ultimately I only finished with the law degree because I really wanted to get back into the business world. I've had a almost 30-year now career in banking, investment, and finance. And Alex Morello, the first Latino owner in the National Hockey League, tapped me on the shoulder. I used to run his investment arm, and said, I really want you to do this in terms of running the Coyotes, and not because of the coolness of sports or even because of the deal making and the business of sports, but because of the voice that sports gives you to really make a difference in people's lives. And that's the core of everything that we stand for, is how do we leverage this incredible platform that is sports to talk about these issues, to be supportive of our community. And those statistics you mentioned, that's also a very core part of who we are. We are going to where the puck is going in America. It's going young, it's going female, Latino, tech savvy, and purpose driven. That's the core of what we focus on. And so this conversation is not only dear to me, it's near to us as an organization. And also, by the way, very near to my family. My wife, Jerica, is a very long-time educator. She was a long-time educator in Los Angeles, actually having taught at Dolores Mission, which is a very well-known school. It's the home of Homeboy Industries, which is a ministry for reformed gang members that is very world-renowned. And so education, we have seen in our lives, in our families' lives, as the key to not only improving an individual's life, but their family, their community, the broader community. And I think this is something that we, as an entire community here in Arizona, need to do more in. And we need to have more of these discussions, but also more action. I talk a lot about, it's not about words, it's about action. And so I applaud you for having this discussion. I also challenge us and challenge everybody, what are the actions that we can take?
Absolutely.
Javier, congratulations, by the way, on a tremendous career. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
We'll talk about our high school rivalry off camera.
Yes.
Stephanie Vasquez, you are such a powerful business owner in our community. I've had the chance to talk to you so many times about the work you're doing, how you're lifting up our community. I haven't really got to talk to you a lot about your background. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about your story and how you were able to get to where you are today.
And thank you guys for having me. I love hearing the stories. I get lost in it all. And yes, Stephanie, I know you personally. However, there's always more, and we can always go deeper.
Of course.
I'm a native Phoenician, third generation. My parents came from very small towns in New Mexico, and they got married extremely young, and they started their family. And my dad came to Phoenix, and he just saw so much opportunity here. And I mean, he was very, very forward thinking, because this was a long time ago, and brought our family here. And I am part of these statistics. I graduated from Maryville High School, so Phoenix Union is such a huge part of my story. So my parents were not educated. They did not really even know how to navigate the educational system, so I stumbled my way through college. I am one of the first people in my family to graduate from college, and I had just always wanted to be a teacher. So I graduated, and I taught in the Santa Maria migrant area, and completely fulfilled. I loved the community. I loved what I was doing. And so I did that for many years until I did a little bit of traveling, and I hadn't really left the country. And I went to Costa Rica, and that's where like I just had this mind-blowing experience. And I was at a coffee plantation. I had no idea that coffee grew from the earth.
How old were you when you did that?
26.
Okay.
Yeah. But however, I had no idea. I was a naive consumer. And I was like, this is just this brown beverage that we enjoy. And so I went to the fields and I was watching this and just had this moment of understanding that me as a consumer, Mother Earth, the people, and it was just this thing that happened. And, you know, the teacher and me went back and I started to do some research on coffee and highly exploitative to our people and to the earth. And that's when, like I said, the teacher just came out and I was like, we have to do something about this because I'm a look-see move kind of woman. Like, okay. So, I mean, fast forward, I now own the longest owned and operated coffee house here in downtown Phoenix. And it's extremely sustainable, extremely green. We've been acknowledged in many different platforms for the things that we do. Also, through my journey of entrepreneurship, I saw that there was some lack in mentorship resources, especially for women and women of color. So I founded a nonprofit organization called AYA. And I mean, we can go on and on about the nonprofit and all of that. However, Arizona is so near and dear to my heart, and I feel like education, it's not one laned. I think that it's our responsibility as business owners and leaders, and all of us are educating our youth and one another on a daily basis.
Again, congratulations, and thank you for sharing. I'm very excited. So Stephanie, and you can kind of look at the power group we have up here right now. Incredible stories, still making strides in our community. And Stephanie, when you look at the social determinants of education laying out, the one we're talking about is, you know, the economy, workforce. How can you explain how these are different from, say, or poverty? You know, because poverty is another social determinant of education. How are they connected? How are they different?
I think we wanted to separate them out because we have to look at the economy as how are we creating opportunity for the people in the community. I think a lot about workforce development from a couple of lenses, right? So as Phoenix Union, we are the 38th largest employer in the state. We have over 4,000 employees. How are we diversifying our pipeline of talent into Phoenix Union, right? As an employer, I think about it that way. And then I think about the kids in our schools. They are the future. They're the future of this workforce. And how are we preparing them to have the skills that they need to have access to those high wage, tech savvy careers that are already in demand and are increasing in demand. So I think for us it was important to look at these from that, where are the economic opportunities in the community, and then how are we intentionally opening up opportunities for the parents and the families in the community who are there who need access to opportunity, and then of course for the students that are growing up in our schools, how are we preparing them as well and then providing them access.
Javier, you were just talking a minute ago about the importance of taking action. Yeah. And, you know, we have a panel up here that is high influence, high representation, and I've got some of your statistics in front of me. You know, it says that you have the largest Latina leadership staff in the NHL. So why is that important for you? How did you make that happen? Just again, when you see some of that on paper and then hear what you said when we started this conversation, you're making this happen.
Absolutely. Well, listen, the three key pillars to our business plan are around impact, which I mentioned, which is leveraging this incredible power of sports to make a difference. But the second is to be inclusive. And I talk a lot about that with first putting diverse voices at the seat of decision making. If I'm going to go target this community that is ever growing in terms of Latinos, in terms of women, fans, right? I need to have those voices at the table. It makes better decision making and better processes and better focus when you have folks that come from different backgrounds. So it's a right thing to do, but it's also the right business decision to make. It's also important for us to have our third pillar, which is to be innovative. So I talk a lot about let us go to where we're in uncommon spaces and uncommon places and do that in a very unique way. So I'll give you the best example. We just did a collaboration with a very well-known fashion designer to design our third jersey. It was the most popular engagement we had on social media with women. Right? And so who would have thought that your third jersey for an NHL team with a fashion designer was going to be how you would attract this female cohort, this youth cohort that is coming through new mediums, mainly social media. That's thinking differently. And so we talk a lot about super serving the fan base, but also the fans in waiting. And as much as I want to make hockey fans, I'm really interested in making Coyote fans, where I can go meet folks where they're at and be part of what clearly is a very diverse, very growing population when it comes to Latinos, to females, at the youth level. You know, they talk about fandom being created between the ages of 8 and 13. We did some analysis, and when you look at a place like Maricopa County, 3 out of every 5 kids between the age of 8 and 13 are Latino. I need to go there. I need to have them be part of what we're doing, even if they never become hockey fans.
Oh, and a lot of exciting things going on in your world right now with the Arizona Coyotes.
Absolutely.
Stephanie, I want to talk to you a little bit more about, I was telling you, what's so impressive when I talk to you is you're not just focused on your bottom line. Like, you're focused on other business owners, other community leaders, and you do such a great job of bringing them into the conversation. How did that become, and I guess why is that so important to you, and how are you achieving some of the things like Xavier just talked about, is carving those paths for inclusion and getting other leaders to the table?
For me, it's been my experience. I remember as a little one, my dad would always say, just listen, don't talk. So it was ingrained in me for the longest time not to say anything. So speaking up was not something that was encouraged by any means. However, from life experiences, our voices weren't being heard, our opinions, and there were so many issues that I could see happening, and no one's saying anything about it. So it finally gets uncomfortable enough where it's like, well, if you're not going to do it, I guess I have to do it, you know? So I had to break through some of that parenting and sorry, Dad, like I'm going to talk. And so because of that, it's very important for me to bring as many people with me so that they can also break through a lot of that programming that we've had as young girls and as women. So it really is part of my core values.
Well, congratulations again on that. You do, again, tremendous job. The feedback I hear from other business leaders who have engaged with you. Okay, I'm going to read a stat here. A recent report produced by Rounds Consulting Group found that Arizona would reap economic benefits of nearly $5 billion in additional state and local tax revenues over 10 years by simply reaching the U.S. average for educational attainment. So we're talking about a staggering figure like that. Why is it that you think, as a state, back to Xavier saying we need to act, why do you think we failed to act when we have this information?
I think historically in Arizona, one of our biggest problems when we have had leaders talking about the demographic shift, that Latinos were becoming the majority in the state, it was always with a negative connotation. It was always viewed as a problem that needed to be solved. Latinos becoming the majority is Arizona's biggest challenge ahead. It is Arizona's biggest problem that we have to solve for. And I think that mindset of viewing us as a problem that needs to be solved is why we have failed to act. Because we haven't viewed the community as worthy of investment. And I think what we are saying at All in Education, leaders like Xavier and Stephanie are saying, is that actually our community is incredibly talented. We are resilient, we are brilliant, we are bilingual, bicultural, we are inclusive, and we want diverse voices at the table. And when you choose to view us as an asset that's worthy of investment, we can make really great things happen in the community, and these leaders are testament to that.
Xavier, how about this, thought of this shrinking of the middle class, and we're having this separation where low-income families really could be struggling here in a few years, not already. So where does education, again, kind of what we talked about earlier, how valuable and what is your message when it comes to education changing the trajectory for generational wealth?
Absolutely. Well, listen, I want to dovetail a little bit on something that Stephanie said, which is Latinos is opportunity. So when you think about education helping to address a preventative measure of creating a barbell economy, which is really what you want to avoid. You don't want to just have those at the very top and then those shrinking further and further below. Education is the driving force, it's the agent to do that. But why do that? Go back to this issue. Latinos are an opportunity. I talk a lot about, from my hat, having been a private equity and banking and investment professional, where's the growth? Where are the growth cohorts that you want to invest in? It's right here. and they're here already. There is the statistic that's done that if Latinos as a whole, as an economy were their own country, I believe they went from fourth to sixth to fifth largest economy in the world. You don't need to go overseas to make investments. It's right here in your own backyard. This is a vibrant opportunity that, from a business perspective, we have to embrace. That's the discussion I've had within the sports world. If you look at where these professional sports teams lie, the growth cohorts, even especially through the pandemic, was the Latino community. We are the workforce, right? When you talk about our youth and entering the workforce, we are the consumer base, and more importantly, we're also the business ownership growth. When you think about Latinas having been the fastest growing cohort for business ownership through the pandemic and over the last 10 years, why would you, as a business owner, as an investor, as a lender, not look at this entire cohort completely differently? And then what do you need for that? You need education to drive that and to continue to advance this community and this cohort so that it is that opportunity and it continues to be the opportunity. Arizona goes as the Latino community goes, as the Latino economy goes. And the faster that we all in the business community embrace that notion and say, wow, how lucky are we, the better we will be as a community.
So you just said education drives that. Stephanie, I'll go Stephanie V, Stephanie P. Stephanie V, you talked to us about your background as an educator. So with education driving that, what are some of those barriers you've seen for Latino students achieving those educational goals?
I think the easier question would be, what have we not seen?
Okay,
There's so many barriers. Number one, something that we could really do something quickly about is lack of representation. I think it's very important. When I was an educator, I intentionally chose where I would teach, and we were 99% free and reduced lunch, and there was no representation, Latino representation on the campuses other than the landscapers and the cafeteria people. So I think representation is because if you can dream it, you can achieve it, but if you can't dream it, you don't even know what you're capable of.
It's like the story we shared with Judith at the beginning,
Right, so I think that's lower level. This really is, it's exciting. I'm listening to us talk, and we're an asset. Like, we are assets, and there's so much growth opportunity, putting on my business hat now, there's so much growth opportunity for our state. However, it's also equally as scary, because if we don't move, it's going to be, we are going to lose. All of us are going to lose.
Stephanie P, since you're in that position, what is being done to improve that workforce so there is representation?
I think one of the most exciting things that we're working on, and I could say for Phoenix Union, is we are launching our own educator academy. So at the high school level, future aspiring educators, current high school students, will have this academy option inside of Phoenix Union to start to develop a pathway towards a future career in teaching, and if they want to be school social workers, school nurses, things like that, so certified professionals. That's really exciting. And then, of course, our work at All in Education, we are working very closely with parents and caregivers. I think that parents and caregivers are our kids' first teachers, and we have to start viewing them as that, and as potential partners in helping us address the shortage issues that Judith mentioned in the video. There is community out there that needs access to opportunity again. And so how are we intentionally trying to solve two problems with providing them opportunity, and then we're going to be filling these talent shortages inside of schools. So why can't we marry those and bring parents and caregivers, community folks who represent the community, who have their best interests at heart, into our schools and help them grow their careers inside of education. I think once we start to do that, we're going to see the academic gains in our students. Our kids are going to be better prepared for the workforce, and I think we'll just expand the access to opportunity across the region, and that's what's exciting.
And I think we know it's not one organization or one leader that can do it all.
Right.
So if you're watching this conversation and you're thinking, oh, okay, well, Stephanie's got it, because that's what she's supposed to. That's what All in Education. And then you look at Xavier, who's the president of the Coyotes, and you think, well, he has nothing to do with educational attainment or workforce development. But it's the exact opposite. And so Javier, what's your answer to the question of how are you, I guess, and the Arizona Coyotes helping achieve educational attainment for some of our students? And also, obviously, workforce development can be a big path that you can help with.
Absolutely. Well, I have a slight different take on it in terms of looking at it internally to the community and then externally. Externally is leveraging this power that sports gives us to highlight the importance of the Latino community to the economies that we're in, specifically here in Arizona. I get a chance to sit with business leaders because they're interested in bringing their employees, or they're interested in partnering as a sponsor for us. And we talk about this community and where it's growing and where it is going. I was just at the TSMC opening ceremony, and you're talking about being the center of the semiconductor business for the world. So how do we include those that are here to talk about that? So from our platform, it's to be able to open up this discussion and make sure that it is part of their mindset. Now, internally, what I focus on a lot is to make folks understand that they need to be owners in this economic system. They're already participants, right? They're already consumers. They're already part of the labor force. How do we make them owners? How do we give them the tools, the products, the services, so that they are all owners, they're all being part of this system in a way, and they're not being taken advantage of, and they're becoming business owners, or they're becoming owners within corporate America. I talk a lot about capital ownership, getting to positions in which we have more Latinos that are directing capital into communities. So the concept of helping bring ownership into this community, I think, is something that we try to do. I try to do a lot, focused internally, and then externally is making sure that people know this is an opportunity, this is an asset. We need to have a focus on it because it'll be better for the entire community.
That's a great answer, yeah.
If I can just add to, I think one of the things that you just mentioned, it sparked a light bulb in me, because at the end of the day, it also will ignite a community to start building generational wealth. And if we, at the core, what we were talking about is that, like, poverty and staying in that cycle of poverty is what impacts educational attainment in kids. But if we can start providing access to economic opportunity, families get out of the cycle of poverty, they're building generational wealth, we're going to be solving a lot of problems and removing a lot of the barriers that kids have right now.
And if you don't mind me adding, like, part of that is to actually have that discussion as Latinos. We don't talk about it. It is a taboo subject.
It really is.
It can be very intimidating. It can be very, oh, that's for someone else to discuss. We need to discuss it. I used to be that dreaded uncle who didn't pay for the limo for the quinceañera or the dress. My wife and I, we would start talking about, where's your 529 plan? Or where's your savings account? Or where's your retirement? Oh, my son is the youngest of 19 grandchildren. We hear this conversation a lot, and we push back and say, no, this is a conversation we have to have. We have to do it ourselves first, right? When it comes to being comfortable about being part of this economic system. And then you can create that next level, which is prosperity within the system, right? And so it does have to be an internal discussion as well.
I love where this conversation is going, because it's, we're talking about the problems and the issues. However, now we're talking about standing in responsibility as, as Latinos. What have we not had? What kind of conversations have we not had? What have we not done? What have we not shown our children?
Yeah.
So I am loving this.
Well, I'll follow that question up with similar to what I was saying, where you can't just look at Stephanie and Stephanie's organization and say they've got it. And then Javier just gave us that great answer for what he's doing in the Coyotes. And here you're running a very impressive, successful coffee business. But we're asking you too to say, how can you better prepare maybe a young student for the workforce, so that prosperity, you mentioned prosperity, so that they can not only enter the workforce but be prosperous in that workforse?
Right, like we said, it's not staying in our lanes. And I'm going to add that there's not enough resources for us. We were looking at the statistics, and we are such a huge community. We need more. We need more. So it is my responsibility as a business owner to continue. It is my responsibility to educate and to continue to educate. One day,
but some people would say it's not. But I like that.
Right.
Yeah, you're
and
taking that responsibility.
Everyone can do however they choose to. However, my goal is to create as much impact. how big can we make this ripple before I'm done?
Yeah.
You know, and allow me to model what it is like to be a thoughtful business owner that's not just worried about a bottom line. This is something far larger. So Stephanie and I had a conversation one day because I employed a Phoenix Union mother whose daughter was in the Phoenix Union at one of the high schools. And we just made this huge connection about the ecosystem that we are all taking part in. And once we realized that if we all link arms and we push just a little bit or a lot, we can get so much more done that way.
I know we're going a little bit longer than we normally do. It's just a very exciting conversation. Yeah. I do want to wrap us up though, and I do want to make sure I get this question because I think it's so critical. We're talking about the pandemic and how it affected so many students. And Stephanie, you and I were having a conversation earlier, and the question here is, a lot of students decided to defer their studies and enter the workforce instead, but that can contribute to that growing gap of attaining education. It's going to hurt them down the road. So how can businesses support the continued development and the continued growth toward educational attainment, despite what we saw happen with the pandemic and where a lot of those students might be now working?
Yeah, I think it's important for business owners to have that frame of mind that these two leaders have, that it's not just about a bottom line, right? That it truly is about how a business in the community is supporting the greater good for that community. And specifically for the young people that did have to defer studies to support families because of the pandemic, that's the unfortunate reality is that was not new for them. Like they were probably already having to work to support their families, and now the pandemic just added additional pressure and responsibility on that young person. So I think as business leaders and business owners in the community, we need you all to kind of link arms with us and continue to motivate and inspire kids to say, like, we can support you in different ways, like modified schedules and continue to encourage them to continue their studies, because at the end of the day, furthering their education is what will get them to the higher earning careers, and that's ultimately where we want our kids to land.
This has been such a powerful conversation, and one thing I love to do is make sure that we leave our audience with action items or things that we can take away from this conversation, because there was so much information. It was great. We can sit back and watch it 100 times. But what are some of the things as we wrap up here that maybe we've talked about? We've all had some great call to actions too during this discussion, but what are some of those that you want the audience to walk away from? And I'll just kind of go around the room one more time. Stephanie, we'll start with you and then continue on for just those call to actions and then sort of a wrap up on this discussion.
Yeah. I think my biggest call to action and one that we've been saying throughout the series is just how important it is for leaders from different sectors to come together and to really rally behind the importance of educational attainment and the impacts that it has on your specific sector. So that to me is like, please speak up, right? Don't feel like you need to stay in your lane because you own a business here and you're not involved in education. We are truly one community. We are one ecosystem. And that conversation that we had, kids in my schools, their parents might be working for the Coyotes. They might be working at Fair Trade Cafe. They might themselves be working in your businesses. And so again, we are one community, one ecosystem. And the more that we can rally together and speak on the issues that are impacting our community, I think it'll just continue to have greater impact in the long run.
Javier?
Well, I got a couple of calls to action, as you can imagine. I think to business leaders, I think they need to understand that the continued economic competitiveness of this community, of this country, relies on the economic empowerment of Latinos. And they need to embrace that discussion. They need to see this community as the asset and opportunity that it is. And they need to then, as a result, ask themselves, what are they doing to support that? The biggest thing they can do is support the education of this community. To Latino families and to the Latino community, we also need to embrace that discussion. We need to be okay having uncomfortable conversations around pushing us towards an ownership mentality, giving us the services and the products into our own households with our own families to say, you have to be economically empowered. You have to be educated in order to be economically empowered. And so I think there's things we can do on both sides, and those would be the two main calls to action that I would have.
Stephanie, V, or you had something?
No, I was just like, that's so perfect. Thank you.
Segueing into business leaders
Yes,
taking more
I love it.
responsibility. Stephanie, go.
So while we're asking for our business leaders to do more
Yeah.
and giving them more responsibility, my call to action would be, let's support those businesses that are thoughtful so that those businesses can grow and so that those businesses can create even more impact. If we were just to focus a little bit more on those businesses, how quickly is that turnaround going to happen? Because that convincing component isn't there, because we already see our community as an asset.
Fantastic call to action. Yes. Support those businesses. I do. These conversations are all amazing. As a business owner myself, I do have just, you're empowered, you're inspired, just like you were. You got jazz. I'm excited. And I just know we can continue to support the work we're doing, continue to support the community, the economy, and the future growth of Arizona. So I do want to thank all of you for joining us on this panel. Xavier, Stephanie, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of Pocket Sepas All in Education. I do want to give you an opportunity to thank the Garcia family. We always want to thank them at the end of every show.
Yes, we are super grateful. The Garcia Family Foundation continues to support our work and is the reason why we're able to have these great conversations. So we are super grateful to the Garcia family.
All right, we thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.